From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
So hi, welcome to another show. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom here on WBEZ. I'm sorry, I'm kind of busy right now because I'm filling out all these forms. We just got informed that because we sometimes criticize the Rahm Emanuel administration, we have been considered to be a protest organization. And because we're downtown, that means that our show is now a major parade. So I have to fill out all these forms, and it's going to be a little difficult to do. But I mean, the thing is, look, it was just a mistake. The mayor admitted it was a mistake, and we all have to do the paperwork for it, but we'll be happy to do it as soon as we can inventory all of our sound equipment. There's a lot of it here. I'm Ken Davis. Hi, welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom. Today, a special focus. There is a movement, a kind of an incipient movement. A number of public officials have signed on to it, that maybe for small busts in the marijuana field, instead of sending all these kids to court, and I'm saying kids, but sending people to court and spending all that money and tying up all that police time, it might be a better idea to just write them a ticket. And just think about how lucrative that would be for Chicago if all of a sudden everybody was getting a $150 ticket every time somebody caught somebody smoking marijuana in Chicago. There's your budget solved right there. So we've assembled a panel of a couple of distinguished journalists who've been writing about this, and a couple of people who have been very much in the field and impacted by this on the program today. I speak first of all of Mick Dumke joining us here. Mick and Ben Joravsky wrote a couple of pieces in the Reader, a series in the Reader that I personally believe is kind of a seminal piece of journalism that I think is going to 10 years from now still be held up as one of the pieces that helped move this public policy forward. And you don't have to respond to that. That's just kind of the way I feel about it.
Well, thanks for having me on, Ken.
And we're also being joined today once again by Rob Wildeboer from WBEZ. Rob did a fascinating little interview the other day with Jody Weis, and so we thought, hey, let's get Jody Weis and Rob both together. And so Jody Weis, our former police superintendent and now the president of the Chicago Crime Commission, is joining us today. And we also have with us, I'm very happy to say, Randell Strickland joining us today. Randell is with the Illinois Juvenile Justice Commission and was for 8 years a probation office, juvenile probation office here in Cook County. So these guys have been on the street and really know something about what's going on, and these guys have been following it as journalists, and I'm just here to kind of ask a few questions. So I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation today. Pull up a chair or pull up your earbuds and listen in for the next half hour or so. Okay, Mick, you get started. There were 47,400 arrests in 09 and 10 in which marijuana possession was the most serious charge. 47,000 people were arrested in those 2 years. Of these, 78% were black, 17% were Hispanic, 5% were white. Of those, 4,000 were found guilty, and the average value of the pot was $55. I mean, that just in itself is a great place to begin the conversation.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah. I guess you could say, arguably, it's not the greatest use of resources. At least that's sort of where we're starting this from, and putting it out there as a subject of discussion. But 47,000 arrests times, I think, on average, usually have 2 officers involved in an arrest takes, I think, minimum an hour to an hour and a half per arrest. So you do the math. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of cop time that's being spent processing arrests for we're talking low-level amounts of marijuana. We're not talking about people caught in charge with distributing, selling, anything like that. These are people caught possessing marijuana.
Jody Weis, is it true that I think I read somewhere in all the research on this that it's the single, how do I want to put this, the single largest number of arrests that the Chicago police make in a year is for low-level pot?
I believe it is. We're close to, as Mick said, about 25,000 people a year get arrested for an ounce or less of cannabis. And when you look at only about 5% of those are convicted, you're throwing away a lot of man hours. You know, if you average all the minutes out, it would actually, when you figure the processing time of the evidence, the property, the transport time, it works out to be on an average for 2009, 184 minutes and arrest, times 2, because there's usually 2 officers.
Wow.
So you start adding it up, and it works out about 71 officers, you know, in 2009 were involved in something in which only 5% of the people they arrested went any farther than that.
You mean like 71 full-time equivalent?
If 71 full-time people were involved,
Wow.
and only 5% of the people arrested, you know, had received convictions.
So we keep talking about the police manpower shortage and how
Right.
many are
Right.
not on the street, but 71 equivalent
Right.
cops.
But it's a delicate issue, because what you don't want to do is say, okay, kids, it's okay to smoke dope. We're not going to take any type of criminal sanctions against it. So I think the discussion is very important for us to have, just from a financial standpoint. Think of what those officers could be doing. But you also have to make sure that you have certain practices in place that if we're going to do this and we're going to make some of these changes, number one, don't put forth an image that we're decriminalizing. Look, I always like to say alternative sanctions. You know, people get a $200, $500 fine. That's still a big hit, but you've got to work that out. You know, you got to make sure you're coordinated with administrative hearings and the Department of Revenue so you actually collect that money. What's the incentive for me to pay? And I'm sure we'll get into this later, but just the identification piece. You know, you don't know who you have. So if I don't have any identification, what do? Do I just get a ticket? I may be wanted for murder. I may have some other issues. So then do you take the person down to the police station and fingerprint them? That's more time on the front end. So it's a very complicated issue, but what we tried to do with the Crime Commission was look for some best practices in other cities that have done this, and then we'll give those to the elected officials here just for consideration. So if we're going to do this, just consider these points.
And?
Well, the first part, I think, there's 5 points that we kind of discovered. Number one is an evaluation. We always have a bad habit in law enforcement. We put things in place and we never judge its efficacy. Is it working? Oh, we're going to do this new thing. But we never really evaluate, did it work? So I think if you're going to put something in place, you need to build some metrics in to see, did it work? You know, did we have a disparate impact on the tickets based on the minority communities as compared to other communities? What was the race? What was the age? Did it have an overall impact? Number one, and this is key, you got to get buy-in from the cops.
Yeah.
You know, if you come up with something that they don't like, they're not going to do it. So you've got to train them, you got to get them early on in the conversations. For example, misdemeanor court, police officers are going to get 3 hours of overtime. If we shifted these all to administrative hearings, they don't normally go to administrative hearing. So from a police officer's perspective, to kind of make it police officer neutral, we probably should consider giving overtime for administrative hearings involving these low-level amounts of marijuana, because otherwise the incentive for the officers, if they have an option to arrest or give a ticket, they're going to lose 3 hours of overtime if they give a ticket and don't go in and follow up an arrest. Number three, you've got to involve the administrative hearings in Department of Revenue. In Boston, they put this forward. For 6 months, the court said, we can't handle this. We have no way of even dealing with these tickets. So for 6 months, they effectively made marijuana possession legal in Boston. So early on, you have to figure, are the courts ready to handle this, and how do we collect it? We can have all this great money, fines and everything else, but if there's no way to collect it, it's really of no value. Fourth is the identification aspect. In California, for example, when you get a state ID or a driver's license, you have to give a fingerprint. So it's actually relatively easy to identify the person. Here we don't have those requirements. In Boston, you don't even have to, there's no law about having an ID. So you can give any name you want if you get a ticket, and you can just say, I don't have an ID, I'm John Doe, and they'll put down John Doe. You're never going to collect that. But there's ways to get around that. Luckily, technology is there. There's mobile fingerprint readers that are fantastic. You could come up, get a thumbprint, and know exactly who the person is. And then finally, I think what is important, and I think Mick might have done a good job in his research, but is there anything attached to these low-level arrests? How many times did someone get stopped, perhaps on a probable cause of smell of marijuana or some other reason, and a weapon was taken or a fugitive was found? So I think before we do this, we should probably look hard and do an analysis of the arrests to see, was something else attached to it? Did something get dropped in the case of the negotiations? That maybe they were just convicted for this, we dropped some other things. Because what we don't want to do, as happened in Massachusetts, when they decriminalized marijuana, the Supreme Court in Massachusetts ruled that the odor of marijuana coming from a car is no longer grounds for a search because it is not a criminal offense. So some of the tools that the police officers might use to further pursue things and, quote, clean the streets was gone for them. So we want to just be careful when we do these things to make sure we learn from things that have happened in other cities, and we really develop the best practices here in Chicago and for the county. What I do like about Chicago and the county is we have a state law, and we'll hopefully have a city ordinance that will give the officers the discretion to take either an arrest or give a ticket, and give a little more flexibility and discretion for them as they go about their day. But we certainly don't want to send the message that using drugs is okay. But if you look at the financial aspect that this is costing the city, the very, very few revenues that are coming in, I think Evanston collects about 1/3 of the fines they have for low-level possession or low quantities possession of marijuana. Even if we just collected 1/3, if we gave a $200 fine, we'd still draw in over $600,000 a year. And if the fine was $500, we'd draw in about $2.5 million. And that's more than we're getting right now.
And that'd be a real incentive to fix the problem.
It would be a real incentive.
So and if Chicago's good at anything, it's collecting fines.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's a very good infrastructure for that.
But in some cities, it's been like $2,000 to collect a $100 fine because there's been a whole other bureaucracy built and things like that. So that's why my whole point is just bring everybody together, get the buy-in, train the police officers, make sure we have a way to measure if this thing is working, and then then proceed cautiously forward to make sure we're doing it right.
I thought you were guys. So let's bring Randell into this discussion. One of the things that we've already touched on lightly, but it's really a major issue in all of this, is the fact that for all sorts of societal reasons and political reasons, the people who get mostly dragged into these nets are black males.
Well, as Jody alluded to, there definitely is a disparate impact, and it is a complicated issue. It certainly has a lot to do with the different ways in which high crime communities are policed, right? And so if you have areas, and I was reading, as I was reading Mick's report, the sort of standard language is, high narcotics traffic area or something to that effect. Well, except for the 6 or 7 years that I lived in Ann Arbor when I was in graduate school, I've always lived in high crime communities. I was born in one.
Marijuana possession is about a $100 fine,
right?
Or $50 fine, or whatever. So
and
anyway.
Depending on what part of the campus you're on and what day it is, it might be a $5 fine. At any rate, but the fact of the matter is that for somebody like myself, I sort of fall under that umbrella because of the address that I choose. I live on 57th and King Drive, which has constant police presence. I've had the choice. I've had the experience of having been stopped myself several times right in front of my own house. So I think it's important to look at the policing strategies first of all, because the research that I've seen, that the best research that out there suggests that there is no disparity. There isn't much of a disparity in terms of marijuana use, and the research suggests that if there is a disparity, that it actually accrues to white middle class usage as opposed to usage by people of color, particularly in poor communities. And so, if the data suggests that the usage patterns aren't different, how do you explain why? How do you explain the difference or the disparity in policing and prosecution? Mm-hmm. And I come first to the policing strategies, and of course, our own county board president says that those also are related to issues of poverty and plain old racism. Mm-hmm. Policies get written by people who have a perception of the world, who have a perception of the people that they are responsible or have the authority to somehow oversee, police, or prosecute, right? And so I think we, in sort of redrawing the boundaries of how we police and prosecute and respond to marijuana use, we also have to look at the very basic presumptions that people who make policy have about who uses marijuana and what the impacts are. Because I'm particularly concerned about all the unintended consequences of having people arrested and prosecuted for low-level marijuana offenses, even in the event of tickets. Because particularly in my end of the pool is juvenile justice. And I have seen painfully the unintended consequences of both arrest and court records on young people who are arrested as early as 13 years old, 14, 15, 16 years old, having these records follow them throughout their lives. And so when we are, as I said, redrawing the boundaries, we also have to look at these other unintended consequences. What is the sort of social benefit of either arresting people or giving tickets? And then what are the sort of long-term benefits? Because if we are, in effect, for low-level misdemeanor crimes, putting large numbers of people in a category where they then have or face barriers in employment or in education, student loans, housing, really what is the payoff, right?
One of the things I've been wondering about is this, the city kind of engages in this discussion. Mick, in some of your reporting, there's the points to the disparate impact on black people in this city in terms of arrests. And so instead of arresting and giving them the record like you're talking about, Randall, maybe give them a ticket. But it seems to me we're still going to have the issue of a disparate impact on who's paying those tickets. And especially if you look at who walks through the doors at 26 in California, the criminal court building, a lot of those folks are poor. And if you're handing down $200 tickets, and a lot of people I think in the city are looking at this as a revenue stream, does it really help the city to be putting $200 tickets on families who are struggling to,
Absolutely.
get winter boots for their kids? It just seems like you're still gonna, the police, if I was gonna have marijuana on my street, it'll be, I don't know, a week before a cop car shows up. If I'm got some marijuana at 57th and Morgan, it's gonna be 8 minutes before a cop happens by that corner. It just seems like the tickets are all going to be written in the same places where the people are being arrested. And so we get rid of the problem of the arrest records for some folks maybe, which is not an insignificant issue, but still all the money that's going to be sucked out of those communities.
Right.
Well, I think the other thing to keep in mind, which is important, if you overlay the areas in the city that have the highest levels of marijuana arrests, and then you lay over where the public violence arrests are, they're like this. So the police, and I've sat on a lot of the strategies that we weren't gearing up, okay, where are we going to arrest people for marijuana? It's like, how do we stop the shooting? How do we stop the murders? And unfortunately, they are just like this. And because you have that heavy police presence out there trying to stop the violence, you're going to have a lot more interaction in the community. But if you look at it this way, 95% of the victims of murder come from minority communities. 95% of the offenders of murder come from the minority communities. That's what's drawing the police there.
So
and
the
I think
police are already there.
they're going to be there when the violence is, and that's what they're trying to stop. And I think a consequence is that there's going to be more interaction with young people, and they may have a small amount of marijuana. The cops are thinking, hey, while I'm here, I'm going to get some work in tonight. I'm going to arrest this person. So I think it is good in terms of having that option of arrest or ticket, because sometimes you can perhaps encourage cooperation, perhaps through the threat of arrest, and maybe that young man or that young woman could lead you and give you some information that might get you the person who's really out there who they're looking for, which is the killers and the shooters.
But you guys don't, I'm sorry, Mick, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say those are really good points. The only thing I'd add is that the map for lead poisoning is the same as the map for marijuana arrest or violence.
Right.
The map for poverty, the map for
unemployment,
for failing schools, and so you're totally right. But still, the end result is that we're picking up all. It goes back to the points you were making. The man hours and woman hours being spent on this. And again, we're talking about 25,000 arrests a year, for which this was the most serious charge. So in the instances where someone's also picked up with an unregistered firearm, of course they should be arrested for that, prosecuted, and so forth. But someone's picked up with a dime bag, and I can tell you from reading through a number of these case files, a large volume of these case files, is that they start to read the same after a while. And there may be reasons for it, but it is profiling of a certain sort. As Randall mentioned, often it starts with, officer was patrolling in an area known for narcotic activity and saw two black males walking down the street and approached him for a field interview. And as they approached, the offender dropped the bag of marijuana onto the ground and fled. I mean, it's amazing how many people see police officers and throw drugs on the street in front of them and run away. But you start to see these patterns over and over again. So I think Randall's point about just asking about how these arrests occur is a really key point. But there's that tension with dealing with violence.
Jody, this is something I've always wanted to ask someone like you, in the you know, I don't know, Jefferson Park police, when they're doing the lineup before everybody goes out on patrol, they don't say, let's go out there and bust some marijuana smokers, do they? I mean,
no, unless there's like
unless
there's going to be some like special attention. Say they got some word in like a particular corner.
Yeah,
it was like
yeah.
An open air drug market.
Right.
There'd be a
but
focus.
that's different. That's different.
And
I mean, what I'm trying to get at is, it's not surely one of the higher priorities of the Chicago Police Department to go out and find people who use marijuana.
But Ken, here where a problem is. Before I was superintendent, everything was based upon production. And the officers had come to me and said, how many people do you want us to arrest tonight? I said, I don't care if you arrest anyone. What I want is prevention. Right. You know, because you know what? If we're responding to a crime, we're still responding to a crime. I don't care if you arrest no one, as long as there's no act of violence in this particular area. But for many, many, many decades, you know, you were viewed as a good police officer based upon the number of arrests you have. And some people you have to arrest. But the thought of giving discretion, and maybe, you know what, I'm going to talk to you, I have the discretion, I don't have to arrest you. Now actually I may have something that I could give in lieu of an arrest as a ticket. These guys, the first comment was, how many heads do you want me to collect tonight? And what we tried to change in the 37 months I was superintendent was make arrests when you need to, but the real thing that we want is prevention. And maybe by giving someone a break on a case like a small quantity of marijuana, maybe you've now just cultivated an information source who might tell you about a guy who's running around trying to kill people. So I think there has to be
tons of it into the city.
There has to be a cultural shift where, you know what, it's not about production, it's about prevention. And you know what, you know, maybe I will give you a ticket and we'll move forward. And I think, as Mick brought up a good point, or Rob, it doesn't always have to be just revenue stream. Maybe you do something like traffic course. You either pay this money, or by the way, you go to counseling. You go see something that might help you. So it doesn't always have to be just money coming in. I know the Cook County State's Attorney is looking at a plan in which there would be some type of counseling involved, or there would be something involved to kind of help these kids. You know, I think we have to look at, no one wants to hurt a young kid for having a dime bag of marijuana. That no one really wants to do that. You know, you hope someone makes a mistake. I mean, when I was a young kid, you know, the worst thing that could happen to me would be somebody took the beer that I was able to convince somebody to buy from me and just threw it out. You know, there was never a thought of arresting me or giving me a ticket saying, oh, you took our beer. You know, and I think if we can develop this mindset and change this culture, like it isn't about production, let's go out there and prevent crime. And part of preventing crime is developing a relationship with the community and having the community trust the police. Like, you know what, we're not out just to collect heads. We're out here to try and keep you safe and build a relationship. And I think this is great relationship building if we give our officers another tool. Because right now they have a state law and nothing else.
Do they need another tool? I mean, we're talking about how these marijuana arrests take so much of the officer's time. You got two officers off the street for 3 hours. Couldn't the officers simply choose to walk away or say, okay, well, that marijuana, that's no longer yours?
Yeah,
I mean, when we're talking about, like, we have to have a ticket instead, do we really have to have a ticket? Can't the police just exercise the discretion and say, okay, that's my marijuana?
Department policy.
See ya.
Because my question is, what is now the incentive beyond the state law and the head count? What is the incentive driving the marijuana arrest? There clearly is some. So what is that? And I think we need to look at that. Right?
Well, and you guys talked earlier. I mean, we've got a couple of minutes left here. I'm sorry to say, but you know, you raised this very interesting question, a very delicate question about police incentives. That if police are paid extra, okay, now this is, let's be calm about this. But if police are paid overtime to go to court, and if they get to take a couple hours to go in the middle of the night and fill out some paperwork when they don't have to be out on the street, I'm a human being. I would look at that and say, I kind of like this deal. I don't think I want this to change. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you started off, I mean, right there, if Mick and I arrest somebody, there's 3 hours of our time down. So we're dealing with somebody inside. We're not going to get shot. We're not going to deal with anyone.
That's almost half of your work day.
Yeah, it's almost 3 hours gone. Then one of us is going to get 3 hours of overtime for just showing up for court when the judge says case dismissed.
Right.
So Randall's right. There is an incentive.
There is an incentive.
Create an incentive for lowering the crime rate. For lowering the violence rate. Yeah. When the violence rate in the district goes down, then people there get a bonus. I mean, that's simplistic, but it seems like, you know, we can be creative and create a different kind of incentive, because you're right. And as a taxpayer, let me tell you, as a reporter, having gone to misdemeanor court and seeing the number of officers sitting there all day for 10 minutes when their case may come up, and in most cases it's dismissed, even when it does come up, that is an extraordinary waste of resources
It's a
to
huge
have people
inefficiency.
sitting there. So there has to be another way to incentivize this. And I also think, frankly, that a lot of officers will be interested in coming up with new policies that actually help them make the streets safer, because their lives are at risk every time they're out there too. For every guy who, of course, wants to make a few extra bucks, who doesn't? There's so many other people.
Right,
they're in
right.
this job because
Absolutely,
they want
yeah.
to do it the right
I think
way.
that
And I
should
think
go without
smart policy will sell with the rank
Absolutely,
and file.
and it's one of the things that I've been talking about for a while now, particularly in the juvenile justice system, is sort of changing the accountability and incentive structure so that there is payoff for outcomes, right? Not just sort of sheer number of arrests, but actual reduction in crime, or maybe even in the increase in numbers of young people who are getting assessed and treated for substance, alcohol, drug and alcohol, and substance abuse. Right? I think that would be a better use of the city and the county's dollars, rather than holding people for $140 a day in Cook County or $200 to $300 a day in the juvenile detention center.
I hate to open up a huge topic with about a minute and a half to go, but CompStat, how will CompStat, the new thing that Superintendent McCarthy is bringing in, and it's being rolled out in the schools. It seems to be like it's the flavor of the month, the policing strategy right now. How does that affect, or how will this affect the rollout of CompStat? Can anybody address that?
Well, there's always been metrics involved. I mean, there was metrics involved when you were the police superintendent. There were metrics involved before. Obviously, the specifics of the way this are done are perhaps a little bit different, but I don't know if fundamentally it's that different. I mean, perhaps Jody can speak to that. But the point is, when it's all about the metrics, that officers out there in the street feel a certain amount of pressure to deliver.
Right. As Mick said, CompStat is simply a set of metrics. I didn't steal the word from Bill Bratton. I didn't think that would be appropriate. Gary's from NYPD, so he can use the Bill Bratton term for CompStat. We had the exact same thing. It was crime analysis review. And what you do, you pick something you want to look at. You first observe what's going on. You look at what's being done. You evaluate it, and when you see, then you have relentless follow-up. So what you're trying to do is just say, is the system working, which is one of the 5 things I talked about, is you have to have a way to evaluate the efficacy of any program. But if you make CompStat and say, you know what, guys, this time we're going to look at marijuana busts, because we think this low level of marijuana is not a good use of our resources, we're going to look at different ways. As soon as the police department develops how to measure this and decides what they want to measure, then that'll be on everybody's radar. And the commanders will come in, they'll have to lay out their plan, they'll evaluate it, the head peaks at the police department will evaluate if they're doing it. So it's just a matter of setting up how do we want to evaluate it. But production is not the way to do it.
Excuse me, in a word, it doesn't make it so that there would have to be more marijuana arrests.
No, you can measure it, as Randall said, any way you want to measure it. Just come up with how it needs to be better. Prevention might be a big way.
We're
It's easy.
going to have to drop it there. I'm so sorry. I wish we had another hour to go on with this, and we didn't even approach the important question about shortening Taste of Chicago. That was my next question here.
See, now I know where you're filling out those forms.
Right,
Right.
There'll be fewer pot buses.
Right, that's right. Yeah,
Chicago
that's
this
right.
summer,
That's
so.
true. Mick Dumke has been joining us today from the Chicago Reader. Rob Wildeboer from WBEZ. Jody Weis was, of course, superintendent of Chicago Police for about 3 years, roughly. And joining us from the Illinois Juvenile Justice Commission, Randell Strickland. I'm Ken Davis. We'll see you next week on Chicago Newsroom. You've been watching us right here on CAN TV. It's a community service, and you can find us here on cable, but you can also watch this and all the other programs online at cantv.blip.tv. Check us out there, and you can subscribe on iTunes also. I am Ken Davis, thanking you so much, and have a great new year.